dialogue is going to be discussing faith and healthcare. So we have some discussions from panelists. We have two panelists, it looks like, joining us today. We have Rabbi Nadia, and we have Dr. Frank. And then we also will be hearing from Dr. Choi, who is a professor of theology at Bellarmine University. He teaches multiple courses on moral issues in healthcare, where they discuss how you can approach scientific and technological development in healthcare through the lens of religion. Dr. Frank Woggon is the Director of Chaplaincy Services at the University of Louisville and directs the chaplain residency program at the University Hospital. Rabbi Nadia, she has been a rabbi and a chaplain for a number of years. She works with Interfaith Paths to Peace as the Director of Program Development and is currently at the Temple of Bet Yam in Florida. And we will also be hearing from Dr. Senn-Reeves, who has been a nurse for nearly 30 years and has been a Bellarmine faculty member since 2014. So Andy, if you want to get the videos going. Hey, Andy, we can't hear.
Sorry about that. Give me just 1 second, please.
When I was first teaching healthcare,
Can you hear that? Okay.
It's
Yeah, you're
very
good.
quiet. It's very quiet.
Lots of concepts from which we evaluate situations related to healthcare. After teaching this class for a while, I realized that health of an individual is so closely related to public policies and the environment around the person, some of which are in their control, but a lot of which are outside of their control. So it made me realize that if we're going to talk about moral issues related to healthcare, we really have to talk about it in an intersectional way. So that racial disparities, gender inequalities, socioeconomic situations, all needs to be part of the conversation. So as a theologian, I realized that theology cannot be, strictly speaking, just a religious idea. Theology really has to be an anthropology. It has to be sociology. It has to be natural and social sciences. It has to be policy making. It has to be about voting, access to voting. It has to be about fighting for our environment, because the environment situation affects not only individuals but more disproportionately in areas where their socioeconomic situation is dire. So I think thinking about it more broadly, because I was teaching this class, helped me not only become a better teacher, but also a better theologian. And any good theologian ought to take into consideration intersection of many aspects that affect our health. Actually, the second question is easier. How did I end up teaching this class? I actually got hired to teach this class as my first job in New York at St. John's University. But at the time, my expertise wasn't in moral issues in healthcare. I was trained to teach issues related to gender, especially masculinities, and how it intersects with with race, especially in my experience as an Asian American person. But somehow I got the final round of that interview, and apparently my teaching demonstration impressed them, and they hired me. And so I was kind of forced into teaching this class because it's the only job offer I had at the time. And thank goodness that I did, because since then my passion and about these issues and the importance, I didn't know it was going to be this crucial at the time, but the importance of issues related to healthcare became sort of immense. So for me, I had no intention of teaching this class, but I was kind of forced into that situation, or whatever your belief system is, providence, right? That now it's one of my most important classes that I teach. Yes, there are many passages, many typical passages that I can point you to, either the Genesis 1 or the Great Commandments, or Matthew 25. I mean, there are many passages that I can point to. But it struck me that Micah 6:8, so Micah chapter 6, verse 8, kind of sums up a lot of what I want to say about what I want to do with this class and what I want to do generally as a theologian. So Micah 6:8 says, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Simple, yet definitely not simple in its application. Insofar as healthcare is concerned, at least for Christians, Catholic Christians more particularly, the Lord requires of us to do justice. It's not enough that we have faith and we go to Mass on Sundays, that we have to do our faith, just like how James 2:17 talks about. But we do so with loving kindness. We're not doing that to evangelize. We're not doing that to, save their soul first and foremost, but with loving kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. I think this passage just summarizes what I would love to see all Christians strive to do, and theologians strive, and Christians who are working the healthcare industry is not only to do the job, but also to do it with justice in mind. One of my favorite professors once said, well, our job is to have our heart tied to our backbone. I love this expression, right? Our heart, so it's compassionate, it's loving kindness, but it's tied to our backbone, that we have the guts as Christians, as Catholics, to fight for justice for all of God's creation. And so I think this passage kind of summarizes all of that. Well, not only do I believe that there's a correlation between the spiritual wellness of a person and the physical recovery, there are demonstrated data that shows there's a connection. So unlike the older way of thinking, theology, where the spirit and the mind and the body is separated, that kind of dualistic thinking is sort of outdated, and in fact not scientific way of thinking about it. A holistic approach to theology and holistic approach to medicine ought to be that we take into consideration mind, body, and soul when you're treating a patient. If not for anything else, for the better result for that patient. Even if you're not a religious person, it's a good practice anyway. And good professionals do this, right? I frequent my visit to the hospital, and there are those professionals who know that that the patient is a person, and so it does do something for a patient if the professionals are accommodating the patient's needs that are physical and mental and spiritual. And so not only do I believe that there is a connection, I also believe that there are enough data out there to demonstrate that there's an important connection. And the fifth question is an interesting one and a difficult one. Yes, I've had students that not only cause disturbance, but also differ quite strongly with other students. And even after having read the text, I have students that refuse to believe data. They refuse to believe numbers. And how do I deal with it? Well, I have changed over the years how I address that issue. I used to fact bomb, right? I used to just give them data, and I thought that was enough. But it turns out that when that happens, I want to get to know that person. There's a reason why someone holds certain views, just as I do, just as you do. But then there's a reason why there's a refusal to believe that certain realities actually exist. And I want to get to that reason rather than fighting the point, rather than arguing about the point. I want to get to know what's behind this person that is making the person unwilling to believe scientific facts. So rather than debating about the issue, I would ask, and where did you develop that understanding? How did you come about to a point where you are today? And in fact, often that leads to a discussion outside of the class, privately discussion outside of the class. And there is sort of a yearning for having that discussion, surprisingly. And when I acknowledge that person as a person, I think there's more possibility for debate, but debate doesn't come first. I don't believe facts come first. I know this is different from many teachers. And there are evidence that shows that facts are not what changing people's minds to believe in facts. It's the personal relationship and letting the person know that I care about them, that I would love them and protect their dignity, no matter what their belief system is. I vehemently disagree, but nevertheless, there's a reason why the person ended up where they are. And if there is a story, even sometimes traumatic stories, sometimes actually outside of my boundaries, so I would have to get the person some help. But if it's within my boundaries to kind of talk things out and talk about their past, I think that's a much more effective way of generating a fruitful conversation later. So I would set it up. But again, rather than facts, I think personal relationship is what makes the difference. And it might take the whole semester or even beyond the semester. But I think it's a method that it has worked well for me over the recent years, and I plan to kind of develop that even more as I go on.
Hello, my name is Dr. Julia Senn-Reeves, and I am on the nursing faculty here at Bellarmine. I've been a nurse for 30 years, and most of my work has been in the area of trauma and acute care surgery. And now my primary area of focus is in the care of geriatric clients. My population that I work with right now is a group, an order of Catholic religious men, and I consult with them to keep them healthy and successfully aging in their home environments so they can continue to do what is so incredibly meaningful to them, which is their ministry. So that's kind of where my work is right now. So one of the first questions I was asked to address was, what called you to this work and what makes me stay? And so, I don't have this revelation moment where I can remember, this is why I wanted to become a nurse. I remember as a child dressing up as a nurse for Halloween, and as a matter of fact, I still have the nurse's cap and cape that my mom made for my costume. It's actually in my office. As a young teenager, I volunteered through the American Red Cross at Nazareth Home across the street from our campus here. And this was in the mid-'80s. during the beginnings of the AIDS crisis. And Nazareth Home at the time was the only facility within our community that would care for HIV positive patients. And I also gained a lot of wisdom from the nuns. Most of Nazareth Home at the time was, it was really primarily for the sisters and for select populations that they felt needed their care, such as HIV positive patients. I've always known that I would be a helper. My entire family are all teachers. I'm the only one that is in healthcare, but now I'm in healthcare and teaching, so it seems like a great match. There have been many opportunities along the way that I believe have influenced my calling, and so, you know, why do I stay within this? I believe that I get much more out of the interactions that I have with others in a caretaking role or in a advocacy role or collaboration role than they get from me. And so it is really a sense of mutuality that keeps me coming back every day. I've come to recognize that being present with someone, with a family, with a patient is incredibly pastoral. And then I find that silence can be often more powerful than words, just being present. And the order that of Catholic priests that I work with, they preach Christ crucified. And so what that means in many ways is that we sit with those who are sitting at the foot of the cross, those who are suffering. And I feel like that just really connects to what I do and why I do what I do. So how do I instill in future nurses this caring philosophy about meeting patients where they are? And how do I teach students to embrace those who are different than us? Well, I think I've struggled with this myself, because I really see my nursing, me as a nurse, as a vocation. But not all nurses see it as a vocation. It's always been fascinating to me, because each kind of cohort, I can kind of pick out a couple of students that really see this as their vocation. But regardless, it really is about connecting with people, valuing people, and assuming nothing. We are all different. We all perceive the world in a different way. We all bring different things with us to the hospital or to interactions. And so we have to assume nothing. As nurses, I encourage my students to ask questions and clarify understanding, and really try to put themselves in the position of their patient or family that they're caring for. Much of my nursing career has been caring for trauma patients. And so these are patients and particularly families that I've worked with that kissed their loved one goodbye in the morning, or sent them off to work, or after a family gathering for a holiday. And the next thing they know, they get the phone call, the dreaded phone call that every person dreads to receive. And I've made many of them, and I dread to make them. So things are sudden, and we have to allow patients and families to move slowly and instill trust, because ultimately that's what we want from people that are caring for us, right? And we, trust comes in lots of different ways and shapes and forms, and our spirituality is a piece of that trust, because we trust in some being, some presence that is going to guide us and sit with us and support us and those that we care about. And the same thing goes for us as nurses. When I was really at the bedside 100% of the time, I would stand and be present, quietly if a minister was there praying with a patient or in family. I rarely initiated formal kind of religious practices, prayer or those types of things. But, the things that I did and I continue to do is to provide those small gestures that pat on the back that says, I see you're stressed, I'm here with you. You're not alone. Sitting quietly with someone for a few minutes, even within the chaos of the ICU. It is possible. So much of, when I was in nursing school, so many of my classmates wanted to go into labor and delivery. It's the beginning of life, it's the miracle of birth, all of those things. I will tell you that, and anyone who knows me, that I don't do I don't do labor and delivery, and I don't do pediatrics. And that's just not where I see myself being. But I have found myself being at the end of life with many, many patients and families with just absolutely horrific circumstances. And I feel like that time with those patients' families is really an incredibly sacred time. I've sat with many of my the men that I help support, the priests at tumultuous times or end of life, and it is such a grace-filled time. I've told students for years that the day that I don't have a visceral response, a pit in my stomach, goosebumps, nausea, a lump in my throat, when something big happens, someone dies, a mother hears the news that their child will never walk again, is the day that I need to do something dramatically different in my vocation. And so when working with the Catholic religious, you think, oh, well, they've got the spirituality thing covered. And in some ways they do. But when I'm sitting with them, I try to find things that are of comfort to them. One of the priests I sat with, we said the rosary, and it was beautiful. We were in the emergency room. We were saying the rosary. It was kind of calming him and kind of keeping him from just being in so much discomfort. And it was amazing because behind the curtain on the other side, the family that was there heard us saying the rosary. They were talking, and then all of a sudden you could hear one of the people over there say, shh, 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 you're saying the rosary. And so unbeknownst to us, we engaged others in that spiritual practice and that ability to find comfort and peace. Now, other guys, doesn't work quite as well, but you just have to find what works for them. So, over the course of my career, and it is by no means over, I feel like
Dr. Senn-Reeves' audio was lost in editing, but her words are captioned. I apologize, everyone. Audio will return in a moment.
transcend roles. I want to thank you for the opportunity to chat with you guys today. And please feel free to reach out to me if you guys would like to continue this discussion individually. I'd be happy to do that. Be well. Take care.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Dr. Nadia Siritsky. I am a Reform rabbi ordained from Hebrew Union College in New York City, and I'm also a board-certified interfaith chaplain. I did my training at the Healthcare Chaplaincy in New York City in 2000, and I also worked with the American Red Cross after September 11th as one of two Spanish-speaking chaplains supporting New York City, working at the Family Assistance Center, Ground Zero, and the morgue. I came to chaplaincy as a result of a spiritual exercise that I did in one of my comparative religions classes at Hebrew Union College and Seminary. There was a teacher who wanted to teach us a little bit more about Buddhism. And there is a Buddhist meditation that one does to think about death as a way of helping us reconsider our priorities. And so she led us through this activity where she asked us to think about our life and our goals and where we wanted to be in 5 years. And I had in my mind, already worked out what I thought my life path was going to be. I was planning on being an academic, and I really wanted to focus on the intertestamental period between Judaism and Christianity, and looking at the development of Christianity and focusing on interfaith relationships. That's always been a big passion of mine. So when she asked us to think about where we'd be in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years, that was a very easy activity for me because I already had my 5 and 10 and 15-year plan worked out, and I was going to be teaching in a university, and I'd already published some books on the topic. And then she asked us to take another few moments and think about, at the end of our lives, we're on our deathbed, and we're looking back upon our life. What is it that is most meaningful to us? What is it that on our deathbed we will feel most grateful for having been a part of? And as I thought about that, my first thing that I thought about was the image of a child that I had worked with in religious school. And he was, I was teaching religious school, and he was always this problem child. I was told to never worry about his ability to learn Hebrew because I should just leave him in the back and not pay attention to him because, he was just difficult and not worth it. The thing is, I was very bad with names, and I didn't even remember who that child was. So like all of them they were all wild and crazy back there, but like my job as a teacher was to engage them. And by the time I realized who it was, he was already reading Hebrew. And he became kind of like my favorite student. And one day he confessed to me that he wanted to kill himself. And he was like in 4th grade. And upon further reflection and talking with him and learning, I realized that he was being sexually abused at home. And we were able to intervene to get him to a safe place. And he became a happy, healthy, well-adjusted adult who didn't want to kill himself. He was able to finally be safe, work through his issues, and became a teacher, special needs teacher. And when I thought about what I would want to think about at the end of my life, and this was 20 years ago, so I thought of him. And I thought of like how I was so grateful that I was able to intervene and change the course of his life. And I did that through the counseling that I was trying to do with him. I didn't have the skills to do the counseling, but somehow I managed to, and I was able to draw on the resources of our principal, who was a social worker, and I know that I helped change his life, and that made my own life more meaningful. Realizing that, I realized, in light of that being what makes my life most meaningful, did I really want to spend my life in academia, publishing books about the intertestamental period? Wouldn't it be more meaningful for me to work with other people in moments of crisis and to help them and support them? And that was the beginning of my calling to chaplaincy. And I did my first unit of chaplaincy at New York Presbyterian Seminary in 1997. And it was phenomenal and life-changing for me because I learned about chaplaincy, which is about how to walk with people and support them, not to fix them, not to convert them, just to bear witness to them and help them access their own resources to cope. And it was truly transformational, not only in terms of my ability to support others, but in my ability to understand myself and gain skills to cope, to make meaning, and to live. And that experience really has defined who I am. I think about how I would hate to live and be my life without those skills that I gleaned from chaplaincy training, about learning to understand and tolerate difficult emotions and make meaning and find purpose and support others and hear past the words to what in chaplaincy we call the music behind the words. And that's the training that we receive in chaplaincy, is to hear the music behind the words, to understand the emotion, the energy. Too often in this world, I feel like we focus on words, and that distracts us from the emotional dynamics and spiritual dynamics that are going on. So the other question that I was asked to speak to is, how do I deal with people of different beliefs in light of my own beliefs? But the experience of chaplaincy training is to realize that all of our beliefs are words and content, and that really, as I understand it, God is beyond words. And chaplaincy is about helping people by going beyond the words, beyond the content, to connecting spiritually. So I think of beliefs as distractions of this world. And so I don't focus on the fact that maybe I'm talking to someone who's got different beliefs. You know, maybe their beliefs are shaped by experiences in their life. I try not to focus on their beliefs. I try to think about what's underneath their beliefs. Do I witness a correlation between patients' spiritual wellness and their physical recovery? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. I think there's some really interesting research about how meditation can increase someone's capacity to respond to chemotherapy, for example. I have a family member that recently had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, but through prayer and meditation seems to be cancer-free now. So I do have moments where I can bear witness to some of those miracles, but I've also buried children, and I've sat with people who had died, and they were spiritually finding healing, but their bodies weren't able to. So I don't think I find a correlation there. I draw strength from those that I've been able to witness, but I haven't discerned a pattern. But I certainly support research to further explore that. The other question that I have to answer is, what is my favorite spiritual practice to conduct with patients? And so that is, I think, my prayer time. With patients, it's kind of like a form of Reiki and meditation on love and light, and trying to become a conduit for love and light. And so that probably is my favorite practice. In Judaism, there's a belief that the presence of God hovers above the bedside of one who is ill. So when I, as a chaplain, go into a patient's room, I'm entering into the presence of God. So I don't go in there and say, I'm going to help them and fix them. Rather, I'm going in there to try to help become a vessel for God's light and energy for that person. And one of the things that I realized when I stopped doing chaplaincy, because I've had an interesting journey where there have been times where I've worked as a chaplain, but I also for 5 years was working as vice president of Kentucky One Health, vice president of mission, working at Jewish Hospital. And I was primarily in an administrative position. And for the first year or so, I was not doing patient visits because I was working in administration. And I started to notice that I was missing something. And I realized it was because I wasn't doing that daily practice of praying with patients, which was grounding me. And so I started to visit patients and who were requesting a rabbi or chaplain or spiritual presence, and was able to ground myself that way and provide some support to patients as well. Now, not all of my patients' visits are uplifting and joyful by any means. So there was a question, are there moments in my ministry that I find particularly difficult? And certainly there are. The story that I think of when I hear that question is I remember I was working in Philadelphia in hospice, and there was a patient that had been assigned to me, and he was homeless. He had profound psychiatric disorders, and he had end-stage cancer of the penis, and he was incredibly angry. And when I came to visit him, I was assigned to support him. He cursed me out. And I said to him, I'm sure you have a lot of reasons to be angry. And he cursed me out again. And then the next day I came and he cursed me out again. And I kept showing up, and I didn't take his anger personally. It was a little difficult because, of course, when someone's cursing you out, and he was very creative and eloquent in his cursing abilities, of course, your inner kid is like, don't say that to me. But I also understood, like, he had gone through horrible things in his life and was undergoing something horrible, and he was alone, and he needed someone to bear witness to his anger. And so that's what I did. I held up his anger as valid, and I would say to him, you have every reason to be angry, and I'm sorry. And I kept showing up. And I also worked with some of the other staff. There was a social worker at the nursing home where he was, and I kind of helped her understand his anger and reframe it so that she didn't personalize it. And soon she and I were visiting him. And when he did die, he, who had been all alone and abandoned by his family, he was holding on to our hands. He had shared. He was no longer angry at us. He was able to come to a sense of connection, which was one of the first times that he ever felt connected to a human being he shared with us. And I think about that story. That's going to be another one of those memories that I hold with me when I die, that I know that my life was meaningful because I was able to be there with him in that moment and transform some measure of his anger to healing. And his body died, but I believe that his spirit found some peace. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have tried to help him transform that darkness into some light. And that's sort of what I think of as my call as chaplain, is to do that sort of spiritual alchemy where you transform darkness into light. And it does take its toll at times, but it is also very spiritually rewarding and a very big part of what has called me not just to be a chaplain, but to look at the world through that lens. So the last question is, how has my personal worldview evolved as a result of my work as a hospital chaplain? And that's an example. I think that story, he was a profound teacher to me, to not see situations in isolation. When something happens, I don't get upset by that moment because I understand that that moment is part of a larger whole. You know, that child who wanted to kill himself, that individual who was cursing me out, lots of other moments of darkness that I've borne witness to. I also hold on to those moments of people finding light. And I'm not always able to access it or visualize it. I don't always walk away with a happy story, but I'm able to tell myself that hopefully I've made a difference. I've been a catalyst in their own journey towards healing. And I might not always see it, but I work very hard to try to respond whenever possible to darkness with light and trying to transform it with light. And I think that carries me into other experiences in my own life and family situations, dealing with politics, whatever it is, to try not to let that moment get the best of me, but to use it as, to see it as just one part of a larger whole, and to understand that part of what chaplaincy has given me is the tools to cope, to not personalize, to understand the larger sacred mission upon which I am on, and to be able to be a vehicle for healing for others. And that in turn brings me profound peace and sense of purpose. And so I'm incredibly passionate about chaplaincy, specifically the skills of clinical pastoral education, which is very intentional about experiential education and helping you to experience difference, go deep into the things that are most uncomfortable to you, and learn to find light and healing and meaning in that, because there's a lot of challenges in this world, and it can be exhausting to try to escape and avoid and deny and pretend they're not there. But really going through the darkness into the light, that's the stuff that religion's made of. And so I'm grateful to be part of this panel, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Frank Woggon, and I'm the Director of Chaplaincy Services for the U of L Health downtown campus, and that includes U of L Hospital and the Brown Cancer Center, Jewish Hospital, and the Fraser Rehab Institute. We have 24 chaplain and chaplain residents who provide spiritual care in those downtown facilities. I became inspired to pursue a career in the ministry in healthcare chaplaincy when I did my first training unit at Central State Hospital in 1990. That was after I received a postgraduate scholarship to do some work here in the United States after I finished my academic training in Germany. And part of that was clinical pastoral education, which is the training for healthcare chaplains. And what inspired me was not particularly the location, but it was the opportunity and the privilege to be with people, patients in their worst moments and in their crisis, and to be allowed to become a spiritual companion and to come alongside and to care for them. As healthcare chaplains, we do engage, we do care for patients from a multitude of spiritual orientations, religious backgrounds, and belief systems. And in our training, we learn and we teach a basic theoretical knowledge about perspectives on health and illness in various religious traditions and according to various spiritual orientations. But that only provides a very general frame of reference. The way that I engage people from a background that is very different than mine. And mine is Christian and more specifically German Baptist. The way that I approach patients from diverse spiritual backgrounds is through respectful curiosity about their spiritual lives. What I mean by that is that I let them teach me what is important to them, what their spiritual orientation, what their religious tradition means to them, and what it means to them now that they're ill and sick and that they experience this crisis, and then how I can join them. And some will let me join them, and some will prefer to have somebody from their own tradition provide care. And that's certainly their right. And I don't take that as a rejection. My role then is to make sure that they can connect with those resources. And my work becomes a ministry of referral. One questions that I got in preparations for this video was whether I saw a correlation between spiritual well-being and physical recovery, or the physical outcomes of treatment. And the answer is yes and no. I certainly have seen patients recover in ways that was medically unexpected, and they credited their faith with the recovery. And to me, that made sense and makes sense, particularly if we think about our spiritual lives and our faith experience as a combination, on one level, as a combination of biochemical processes in our brain and in our body, and hopefully they are positive processes. Right? Compare it to a placebo effect that produces actual physical change in the body, and it's not just the subjective experience of the patient. And we know that positive placebo responses happen particularly if the placebo changes the meaning of the illness experience in positive ways. For example, if it instills hope. And I'm not saying that faith is a placebo effect or is a placebo, but what I'm saying is that our spiritual lives, our spirituality may function under certain circumstances in a similar way when it changes the meaning of an illness experience in positive ways. And I also have worked with patients who grew spiritually through their health crisis, who were doing well spiritually, who integrated their illness into their overall life story, but who did not recover. In fact, many of them died. But they came to a place of acceptance and of peace. And what I've learned is that healing comes in different ways. And that wholeness can happen even when recovery doesn't happen, when cure doesn't happen. And that cure may happen, but wholeness might not happen because the patient might not come to terms with the spiritual challenges of their illness, or might not integrate the spiritual implications of their crisis. So it's complicated. And we do have some research that seems to suggest that people who are religiously observant do better than patients who are not religiously observant. But I think we need to cite that research with caution, because one reason might simply be that religiously observant people may not engage in behaviors that have health risk or that produce comorbidities once they're ill. My favorite spiritual practice, one of my favorite spiritual practices when I care for patients, is anointing with oil, if and when that is appropriate. And that is speaking pre-COVID, when we could touch more easily with permission. These days we can do it with Q-tips. That's not quite the same as far as touch is concerned. That's an important piece of that ritual. But anointing with oil is such an ancient ritual. And rituals have a way of conveying spiritual meaning in a way that words often cannot. And they create spaces for patients to experience and to express feelings that they might not readily express in other ways. With anointing with oil, I can adapt that ritual to many different spiritual orientations and backgrounds, and can interpret it in a way for patients that it fits within their meaning perspective. And that's one of the neat things about it. One of the particularly difficult situations when I care for patients and for families is when I care for families who have lost a loved one to gun violence. And we do that a lot at a university hospital because we are a level 1 trauma center. And unfortunately, gun violence and death from gun violence are on the rise. What makes that situation so difficult is that families most often cannot see their loved one, because the body basically becomes a crime scene and is under the jurisdiction of the coroner. So that really complicates their grief from the beginning. And it's particularly difficult when I know that their daughter or their son have died in our trauma room, and then they come to the hospital and they don't know that yet, but they ask about the child. And I cannot tell them because that's not information that I can give. That needs to be given by a medical professional. So there's really not a good solution except to collaborate as soon as possible with a physician for the two of us to go and sit with the families, and then for that person to convey the tragic news, and then I can work with that family and be there for comfort and to try to get their grief process started as best as I can under those circumstances. How has my personal worldview evolved as a result of my work as a hospital chaplain? Well, at one point in my own faith journey, I believed that the world was a safe place for people of faith, meaning that there would be divine protection for believers. And I don't believe in that same way. I cannot believe in that same way anymore, particularly working in a trauma center where I see that the world is not a safe place. I cannot believe that faith protects us from a truck that suddenly changes lanes, or from a drive-by shooting, or for that matter, from a cancer diagnosis. I think what faith can do is it can help us navigate a dangerous world, and it can help us make meaning in a dangerous world, and it can help us feel connected to a God who is with us when bad things are happening to us.
All right. So I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Those videos were so great. They were so good. I loved them. So if you guys don't mind turning on your cameras, we have some discussion questions to kind of talk about. The first one that I kind of want to pose is, what is something that you heard throughout the presentations today that really resonated with you? Something that, really resonated with me that Rabbi Nadia said is when she was talking about the patient who, was, cussing her off. And, when she talked about how, moments don't happen in isolation, everything happens within a context and a situation. And, that's something that I can definitely carry with me as I continue through life, because I am somebody who is a little more emotional and I tend to take things a little more personally, but I definitely think that's something that I can definitely carry with me and remember as I go through. Yeah, go ahead. Eve, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, you didn't say who it was. I didn't know how many other people.
Oh, sorry, my camera. I guess my mic didn't turn on before I said your name.
Okay. Gosh, I wish I would have taken notes, but at least this is being recorded. So, Rabbi Nadia, this was amazing. I loved everything you said about trying to get through to people, even if they are not welcoming. I mean, there's a poster in the campus ministry office of Father Ron Knott, who's a Louisville priest, and of course the word Catholic, we're a Catholic school, nominally at least, but of course the word Catholic lowercase means inclusive, and he says, we welcome them not because they are Catholic, but because we are Catholic. And I think about that no matter what your belief or faith tradition or lack thereof, it's our actions, it's our demeanor, it's our words, it's our compassion that transcends that. And I sometimes think, back in the days when we used to be out and about and somebody, snapped at you, in the grocery store, you got too close or whatever. I think, you know what, I'm going to absorb this because maybe they'll get it out of their system before they get home. Maybe they will not, slap their kid because they're having a bad day. Not that we'd be a punching bag, but maybe we can absorb that. And I like what you said about Reiki. I am a second degree practitioner, And I really like that. I think that has given me the tools to handle a lot of the slings and arrows that have come my way, and that we could also use it to deflect it from other people. So are you a Reiki master, or?
Yeah, I did train with Reiki as part of my many different spiritual trainings. And I love what you said about like absorbing and taking it in as a gift, like an offer of grace and prevention also. One of the things that I always talk about at Kentucky, when we had like these culture concepts, and one of them was assume positive intent. And the example I always used when I taught about it was, let's say you're driving down the highway and someone cuts you off. You have two choices when someone cuts you off. You can curse at them and be like, oh my gosh, or, really try to show them a lesson. Or you can be like, well, maybe they're rushing to the hospital. I'm going to send love and prayers their way. And the reality is we are in the car are never going to know what was going on in the car in front of us. So they're both equally plausible. The question is, when we finally do get hopefully safely to our location, let's say we were driving into work, are we going to be, how is our day going to be shaped by the thoughts that we had? Was it, if I was cursing out that person who cut me off, am I going to be in a good mood for the rest of the day? Thinking, why me? Why me? Or if I sent love and prayers to them because I imagined that they were heading to the hospital, like the rest of my day, like there's something personally beneficial as well as hopefully helpful for others when we assume positive intent. And I feel like that's actually a mind, heart, spirit, muscle skill. The more we practice it, the easier it gets to do it. Just like any other exercise, the more we do it, the more likely we are. And we live in a world where we're being taught to assume the worst and then, make some funny meme or post on social media about it. And while we can do that, at the end of the day, like, what does that leave us with? So I think there's like multiple components, just like in my example about Reiki, like I was missing out on that spiritual prayer time with the patients. It had a benefit for me as well. And we are affected by the thoughts that we have about others.
I want to add that there's a couple years ago, a color was developed called Vanta Black. And it is the blackest pigment ever created. It's very kind of disturbing to look at a picture of it. Now there's pictures online of a car, which is why would you have a car that's, has zero reflection? But there's a picture online of some foil with this paint, and it's like looking like into the universe. And I think about that as far as the energy that we absorb from other people, that it can stop with us. Now, you have to kind of be in the right frame of mind, which is a practice. You do have to cultivate that and work at it, and it's not 100%. But you could take somebody's negative energy and you could stop it right there. You could be that completely absorbing, and then there's the foil behind you to keep it from soaking in. Mm-hmm. So I think about that picture a lot. And if we are we absorb, but we do not reflect back.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was a pleasure. Thank you. Wonderful hearing from you. I'm glad I got to meet you.
Thank you. Me too.
You were talking about how, like, trying to be kind in those little loving ways of, like, not getting angry back at a person. And it reminds me, in my theology class right now, we're just finishing up reading St. Teresa's autobiography, Story of a Soul. And her entire thing is her little way. So doing the small things with greatest love. And that's just something she talks about, is like the small inconveniences of someone splashing her with water, just like taking that and being loving back to them. And obviously it helps her very much spiritually, and it helps them as well. So it just really aligns with what you were saying today.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that often the truths that are true in one religion find their echoes in others. So there's a corollary in Judaism for that, but I think that all of the world's religions have that practice. So thank you for sharing that particular one. Oh, I love the picture you've just posted.
It's in the chat. I'll show you guys after. Every time I open the chat in here, it messes up the screen for some reason.
Christina, you're muted.
Christina, you're muted.
I love her so much.
I was wondering why they were saying my name. I just want to reiterate before I go on to the next question that technically we do end at noon. So if you do have other commitments, you can feel free to leave. Please feel free to fill out the survey in the chat. For those of you in person, I believe Andy gave you a survey as well. Our next dialogue next month is going to be about religion or faith and language. So we're getting really excited for that one. So you can feel free to join us then too. We will be sending out more information on that later. But for now, the next question we kind of wanted to pose to you guys is, how does your personal worldview call for you to care for other people, whether it's in a healthcare setting or if you're not in a healthcare field or major, how else do you feel called to care for other people?
Yeah, I think for me, my entire worldview is really just based around like making sure that I am putting out goodness into the world and trying my best to care for others in my own way. So like while that's not in healthcare, like in everyday interactions that I have, I really want to make sure that people can like understand that like I do care for them, even if it's just on a level of like, you're a person, I'm a person, and that's like what really matters here, regardless of like all the any disagreements or any other factors that might come up. We are all humans, and as such, that's just an amazing thing, and that's just an amazing connection point regardless. So yeah, for me, it's just like making sure in my daily interactions that I'm like trying to put forth goodness and light. And does it always happen? Unfortunately, no, but that's definitely something I try to be intentional about.
I totally agree. I think that I've always said, I could be working at Starbucks and still fulfilling my calling to serve God in ministry, because it's about how you treat people and the energy and love and light that you bring. And I think that this pandemic has really highlighted for us that health is part of everything that we do. And there's a role for all of us to play in healthcare when it comes to public health. And that, I think, is something that hopefully we're just beginning to fully embrace.
Right.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Rabbi Nadia. We have conversations a lot from my role here at the university about vocation, like small v vocation. What is your calling and purpose in life, and how are you living that out? Not as just like the career that you're going to eventually be in, but how are you still living that out right now as a college student? How are you seeking out opportunities to find fulfillment through your way of being in the world? And so I just think it can, like, it's kind of to your point, like it's these masks that we're wearing, right? Where it's maybe volunteer work that we're still finding a way to get out and to engage with our community in spite of, all of the pandemic and everything else that's happening right now, or those fears and stuff. It's in my role as a mother, I'm caring for these 3 little humans and hopefully raising them up to be better than me. so I think just like you said, you could work at Starbucks and you could be living into that vocation. And I think that's so important. And I think it's something that oftentimes we're always thinking about, when I have this big important job, then I'll be able to do that, instead of recognizing that wherever you are right now, you can live into that, you can bloom, you can give back in large and small ways, wherever you are in the time that you are in currently.
Yeah, Laura, I definitely really agree with that too. You know, even from like the student perspective, you hear so many times people are like, oh, well, like once I get into my career and stuff like that. But like also just realizing that like we're at where we're at right now because we're supposed to be where we're at right now. It's not about trying to get on to the next thing. It's about, you know, being where we're at right now also and being mindful of that also. I think that's a really important point.
I'm glad you said that, because I feel like that's another one of those lessons of this pandemic. Like so many people live for the future, sacrifice for the future, and really focusing on the future and the past is a form of avoidance of the present. And if anything, the pandemic has taught us that we don't know if we're guaranteed a tomorrow, and we absolutely need to make the most of right here and right now. And there is love to be shared right now, and each person who has a heart is capable of doing that, and that does more good than a million sermons and a million other things. Definitely.
So the last question that we had kind of come up with to pose to everybody is, you know, Dr. Choi kind of alluded to in his discussion that, you know, as a patient, you can really tell the difference between someone who's, you know, doing their job and someone who's really caring for you as a patient. And so, you know, kind of, if you've ever been kind of on that end, like, have you really noticed a point where you feel like, you know, your provider was, you know, acting like they cared about the whole person rather than just like doing their job and getting on to the next patient?
I'm not sure who's still on. I'm happy to respond, but I don't want to like over dominate.
Well, this is Julia Senn-Reeves. I was just able to join your all's conversation, and I think that's a great question, Christina. And it's something that I actually talked to my students, my nursing students, about that importance and that difference between taking care of someone and caring for someone. And those are really distinct kind of principles, and families have articulated that is you know, an important piece for them, that they need to see that their loved one is being cared for and not just taken care of, particularly in those vulnerable I mean, when you're in the hospital, or when you're having a health you know, event, or you're navigating the healthcare system, that is unfamiliar. Even if you're in healthcare, it's unfamiliar because it's uncomfortable, and it brings up lots, very few interactions with the healthcare system are really for good reasons, if you think about it, right? So, um, and even the ones that might be perceived as for good reasons or good experiences, they're still fraught with anxiety. Like women who are pregnant, you know, they might be very excited about their pregnancy, but it's that worry, it's that concern, and what might go wrong? Am I doing the right things? You know, all of those pieces. And so, you know, I think it's really important to make that connection with the human being. In healthcare, we kind of changed. I don't know. I've been doing it for so long, I can't even quantify, you know, when it happened. But we started talking about the patient story and how that is really important. And that's making that connection. It's not the person in this room or this diagnosis or that kind of thing. It's, but did you know he, you know, was a truck driver, he was a volunteer and did this. And it's been fascinating to me in my own practice. There was as I was beginning to work with the priests that I currently work with, one of them was just a stinker. And was kind of always pushing back. And it wasn't until he died and I heard his eulogy, and they talked about how this is a man who, stood in a playground in Birmingham during the race riots to keep these African American kids safe on that playground to play. And then I realized this is a man who has spent his life, fighting, and not fighting to fight and be mean, but fighting for the right thing. And so once you get kind of that idea and understanding of kind of what their worldview is and where they how they've approached life, it's so much easier to care for them. And ultimately, I think I get more out of it. I mean, I become a better person, and I become a better caregiver, and I become a better, I just become better at what I do because of that ability to be open and listen to what my patients say.
I love that story so much. And that's a great story because the truth is that there's always a story. And when we don't understand something, we can either judge or we can get curious. And if we get curious, we can be like, well, I bet there's a story behind X, like, because it's not making sense. So I bet there's a story, right? And that's part of assuming positive intent, but it's also like staying open to those stories. And theologically, one of the first chaplains, Anton Boysen, talked about how we're all created in the image of God, and we're all we're living documents of revelation. So the more that we can understand one another and where we're coming from, the more we understand God, in whose image we were created. And all of our religious traditions have stories. And I mean, think about the biblical stories, right? Like a lot of those characters in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, I mean, they were troubled. There were some very troubling stories if you look at it. Cain and Abel, I mean, troubling. And yet they're part of our sacred text, right? So it's about teaching us to look past what we think we understand to find those deeper stories and how can they teach us about love. Because true love is love that embraces everything through difficulty. And takes a lifetime to learn, and it takes a lot of those difficult stories. But I loved what you said about, Julia, about it makes you a better person and a better nurse by learning the stories. And my doctoral research is on compassion, fatigue, and burnout. And the reality is that a lot of times we don't want to know someone's story because we think it's going to tire us. We're afraid if I know that person, then when they die, it's going to be harder. But actually, what's really harder is not having feelings, becoming numb. It is hard to have feelings like sadness when we lose. But research shows that compassion fatigue is balanced by compassion satisfaction, right? So in the emergency room, we're not going to be able to stop trauma patients from coming in, but we can help our staff develop meaning from their experiences. That's what Frank talked about, developing meaning. And, Dr. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, he was a psychiatrist, and he noticed that those people who were able to make it through the concentration camps were the ones who had meaning and purpose. And his meaning and purpose was to study survival. And he found that, and then he was going to write about it, and he did, and it brings me meaning. So that's the thing. How can we derive meaning and look past what we don't understand to where's the story? What can we learn? Eve.
You know what you said about Viktor Frankl? I have a 13-year-old who has been at home the last 11 and a half, 49 weeks, I think we're up to. March 14th was the last time we were out of the house for any substantial thing and inside a restaurant. And,
not that you're counting.
Well, it was my birthday. That's how I remember it.
Oh.
Like, oh, and then captivity. But, you know, as so many young people, I mean, people of all ages, but especially, I shouldn't say young people, it's relative, growing people, growing children, teenagers or whatever, this is trauma, even under the best of circumstances. And, you know, I know we're lucky, you know, we have, you know, permanent homes, and, you know, I'm hoping everybody here has a stable home life and, you know, free of violence and such. But I have a 13-year-old and she's having such a hard time. And I've told her many times that what you said, that certainly many mind-boggling number of people did not survive the Holocaust. But among those who did survive, it was those who looked forward to the after, who made it through. And, you know, we don't want to say 5 more minutes because it's going to be a lot more than 5 more minutes, but you have to have something to look forward to. Even something as mundane, which sounds so glamorous now, but vacations. That it's been found that looking forward to a vacation, planning it and anticipating it, is almost as satisfying as the vacation itself. So I don't know if that's extra now. It's kind of hard to look beyond, but you know, that hope, keeping going and looking beyond and finding meaning in everything and allowing yourself to grieve when it is warranted. We are in a time of great grieving right now. You know, between, you know, the civil unrest of this past year that will continue, but also the 500,000 families who are grieving. So thank you again for that, bringing that up. Just want to share that.
No, thank you. And, you know, I think especially for those of us who are younger, we don't have things to look back on. But this experience is going to teach us about hope in a way that will hopefully carry us through, because this will at some point end. And I know it's so hard to believe in the moment, but 20 years from now, those of us, your 11-year-old who's going to be an adult, when they experience another challenge in life, they're going to be able to remember going through a challenge that lasted longer than they wanted, and it did resolve. And they're going to be able to convey that hope to their next generation much more convincingly because they experienced that liberation of sorts. And that's what I think all of our experiences of challenge can be. They can teach us how to have hope and compassion for other people when we encounter them who will be going through challenges.
Oh, this discussion's so good. It's making me feel so great. Those are all the questions that I have for everybody. So if anybody has any concluding thoughts, otherwise we can get wrapping up.
I just wanted to go ahead, Rabbi.
I was just going to say thank you so much for this opportunity. I always love panel discussions because it gives me an opportunity to talk with people I would not normally get to talk to. And I always walk away learning something new and better for it. And I feel like that's definitely true. So I'm grateful to all of our panelists, those who stayed, those who were not able to stay. I learned a lot from them. And to all of you who are participating in this conversation, I definitely am grateful to each of you and what you've shared.
Thank you so much. Hey, Sally.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you all for the awesome discussion. It was really great to learn from you all. Unfortunately, I have another class right now, but I want to say thank you.
Yeah, we are right at the scheduled time for a lot of classes to start. So yeah, but thank you so much, Rabbi Nadia and Dr. Senn-Reeves, mom. She's my mom for doing this. Eve, did you not know that? Yeah, it's like a fun little Easter egg on our campus. It's like, oh yeah, Andy and Dr. Senn-Reeves.
Is it how you wound up with Senn-Reeves? Seriously?
No, actually, Senn is one of my middle names, so I'm compound. Anderson, Nagel, Senn-Reeves. Yeah, but
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But
so really, I'm Andy's mom. He's not my son, just so you guys know, because he's well known on campus much more than I am. So I'm Andy's mom, not the other way around.
That is the definition of success.
Any mom of Andy's is a mom of, okay.
Yeah. All right. Christina, please, would you like to close us out?
Yes, thank you everybody for coming. These dialogues, they always just make me feel so great. I think every month it just keeps getting better and better. So, thank you to our panelists and thank you to everybody who came. And I'm feeling so energized right now.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody who came. Really, this was really, really great. So have a great day, have a great week, have a great weekend. It's to my understanding that it's pretty warm in Louisville this week, so enjoy the warmth.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Hi, Mom. Oh.